The door was locked, but it opened August 14th. I don't know how to begin this without sounding like I'm exaggerating, but sometimes the smallest things in life become the biggest problems. Sometimes it's not the loud, dramatic moments that shake you, but the quiet ones, the ones that don't make sense. And for me, everything started with a door. A locked door. A door that should have stayed locked. A door that, for some reason I still don't understand, opened on August 14th. Even now, thinking back to that day, I get this strange pressure behind my eyes, like my mind is trying to protect me from the full memory of it. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I wasn't even doing anything interesting. It was one of those slow, warm evenings where the day feels too tired to hold itself up. You can smell dust in the air, hear the buzz of wires above the street, and everything around you seems a bit too still. I remember sitting on the front steps outside my uncle's old house, a place that never felt like home, but somehow always felt familiar. The house had been in the family for decades, slowly growing older along with us. It had peeling paint, noisy floorboards, and a strange habit of making sounds at night, soft creaks, quiet thumps, and occasionally something that sounded almost like feet dragging across the floor. Everyone blamed the age of the place. Old houses make old sounds, that's what they said. But there was one thing in that house that always bothered me more than anything else: the basement door. It wasn't just any door. It was the only door in the house with a heavy metal hasp bolted across it, sealed shut by an old padlock that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. No one talked about it. No one touched it. Even during the day, the air around that door felt colder than the rest of the hallway. My uncle acted like the door wasn't even there. If you asked him about it, he changed the subject. If you pressed him, he'd say something short like, "just storage," and move on. But you could see it in his eyes. He didn't like talking about it. Growing up, I learned not to ask questions. We all did. But there's only so many years you can ignore something that doesn't make sense. And August 14th was the day I stopped ignoring it. That day started painfully ordinary. I woke up late, made a lazy breakfast, scrolled through my phone, and tried to talk myself into cleaning the storage room upstairs. I had been staying at my uncle's place for a few weeks to help him with errands and small repairs. He wasn't feeling well that month, and I wanted to be around in case he needed anything. But even then, I noticed he avoided walking past the basement door. He would take the long way around, going through the kitchen or living room instead of the hallway, just so he didn't have to be near it. Sometimes I caught him glancing at it the way someone glances at a shadow when they're not sure if it's a person or a coat hanging on a chair. Still, I didn't think too much of it. Strange habits run in families. But that night, August 14th, everything changed. It was around 9:30 p.m. The sun had fully set, and the house felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were tired. My uncle had gone to bed early. I stayed up to wash the dishes, mostly because I needed something to do. The running water, the clinking plates, the small sounds. Everything helped keep my mind from wandering. Once the kitchen was clean, I turned off the light and walked into the hallway. The moment I stepped in, I felt it. A drop in temperature. Not a gentle one, but a sudden shift that made my arms break out in goosebumps. It felt like stepping from summer into winter in a single step. I paused, trying to understand what I was feeling, but no explanation came. The hallway light flickered for a moment. Not enough to go out, just enough to make me freeze. That's when I heard it. A soft metallic click. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But I knew exactly what it was. The sound of a padlock opening. My heart started pounding, so fast I felt it in my throat. I didn't want to look. I wanted to turn around, go back to the kitchen, and pretend I heard nothing. But curiosity, fear, instinct, something pushed me to look. And there it was. The basement door. Unlocked. The padlock hung open from a hasp, swinging slightly like someone had touched it just seconds before. I stared at it, so long that the rest of the hallway began to blur. My mind kept trying to come up with a normal reason. Maybe the lock had rusted loose. Maybe it just fell open on its own. But I knew better. Locks don't open themselves. Not like that. Not silently. Not suddenly after being shut for decades. The door itself was still closed, but only barely. The latch wasn't engaged anymore. It looked like the slightest push would make it swing inward. My hands began trembling, and I took a slow step back. I reached into my pocket for my phone, not even sure who I was going to call. My uncle? The police? A friend? I didn't know. All I knew was that the cold air around me felt wrong, heavy, like someone or something was standing right next to me, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard and forced myself to take a deep breath. The smartest thing to do would have been to wake my uncle, tell him what I saw, and let him deal with it. But something in me didn't want to wake him. Not because I was scared of sounding foolish, but because deep down I had this strange feeling that he already knew. It was like the house itself was holding its breath. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, silently, just enough for me to see it move. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I didn't even think. I just stared as the knob shifted another tiny inch, like someone on the other side was testing it, trying to see if the door would open easily. The metal creaked softly under the pressure. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my legs wouldn't move. The door pushed inward half an inch. Darkness spilled out. A deeper darkness than the hallway. Thick, heavy, like a space that hadn't seen light in years. I took a step backward without meaning to, my heel hitting the wall behind me. The air coming from the crack in the doorway felt colder, sharper, almost like a tiny breath of winter seeping out into the house. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it sinks into your bones. Then the door opened a little wider. Not all the way. Not fast. Just a slow, steady movement, as if whoever or whatever was inside didn't want to startle me. The darkness shifted. I swear I saw something move in it. Not a shape. Not a figure. Just movement. Like the shadows themselves were alive, curling and folding over each other. My throat tightened and I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Only that cold air. Only that slow, silent darkness creeping outward. Then, a sound. A soft, barely there shuffle from deep within the basement. Like someone dragging their foot. Or like something waking up after a long, long sleep. I stumbled away from the door, nearly tripping over myself. My breathing was too fast, too loud. I felt dizzy, like the hallway was slowly tilting. I didn't want to look anymore. But I did. Because I had to. Because some part of me needed to see what was coming out of that basement. The door opened another inch. And whatever was inside was getting closer. I could feel it. I could hear it. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Then the light at the end of the hallway flickered again, this time sharply, almost violently, and the shadows on the walls stretched in ways shadows shouldn't stretch. The movement inside the basement stopped. The darkness paused, listening, waiting. I took another step back, ready to run, ready to scream, ready to do anything except stay there. But then the air changed again. The cold faded. The pressure in the hallway loosened. Just a little. And the slow, steady creaking of the basement door stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then something inside whispered. Soft, breathy, quiet, but clear enough that I knew I hadn't imagined it. It whispered my name, and the door began to open wider. If you want me to continue the story toward the full 10,000 word script, just say continue, and I'll pick up exactly from this moment. The door began to open wider, just enough for my mind to fill in every terrible possibility. The darkness inside wasn't just dark, it felt thick, almost textured, like it could spill into the hallway and wrap around me if I got too close. I stood frozen, my back pressed against the wall, my breath tight and shallow. I didn't know whether to run or whisper something back, but the sound of my name echoing from that basement kept replaying in my head like a broken record. Then, as if someone had flicked an invisible switch, the movement inside stopped. The door held still. The house returned to its usual quiet, though it didn't feel like the same quiet as before. This one felt aware, like the silence itself was waiting for my reaction. And I didn't like that one bit. I forced myself to back away slowly until I reached the edge of the hallway, close to the kitchen doorway. From there, I could still see the basement door standing slightly open, the padlock hanging uselessly from the hasp. My hands were shaking so much I had to grip the counter behind me just to steady myself. I wanted to wake my uncle, but something inside me hesitated. A strange feeling whispered that he already knew something was wrong long before I did. I stayed there for what felt like several minutes, staring at the open door, waiting for any sign of movement. But nothing happened. The house remained still. The shadows didn't shift. No more whispers came from the basement. Eventually, my heartbeat calmed just enough for me to think again. I whispered to myself, okay, maybe it was nothing. Maybe I'm imagining things. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. My body knew what I heard. My mind knew what I saw. Still, denying it felt easier than accepting that something in that basement was awake. I didn't want to leave the door open, but I also didn't want to go anywhere near it. The idea of touching it made my skin crawl. But the thought of leaving it open all night felt worse, like an invitation to something I didn't understand. So after several long breaths, I gathered just enough courage to step back into the hallway, moving slowly, like approaching a wild animal. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder again as I approached, and that familiar pressure returned behind my eyes. When I finally reached the door, I used just one finger to push it gently. It swung shut easier than I expected, like whoever, or whatever, opened it had already moved away. The moment it clicked shut, the cold faded again. I didn't waste a second. I snapped the padlock shut with trembling hands, ignoring how weak my grip felt. The metal lock clicked loudly in the quiet hallway, sharper than any sound it had made before. It should have made me feel safer, but it didn't. It almost felt like I was sealing something in, or maybe sealing something out. Either way, I didn't stay to think about it. I hurried to my room, closed the door, and locked it even though I knew it wouldn't make much difference against whatever I felt in that basement. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, just listening to the faint hum of a ceiling fan. Every sound in the house made me jump, the settling wood, the distant traffic, even the soft rustling of the curtains. It all felt wrong. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into a light sleep, more like drifting than actually sleeping. My dreams were quick flashes, dark hallways, cold air, a whisper calling my name again and again. But the scariest part wasn't the whisper itself. It was the feeling that whoever said my name knew me well, like they had been waiting a long, long time for that moment. Morning didn't make things better. When I woke up, sunlight filled the room, warming my face. For a second, everything seemed normal. I even wondered if the whole thing was just a dream caused by my tired mind. But the moment I stepped into the hallway and saw the basement door still locked, and the padlock hanging exactly how I left it, I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't a dream. The memory came rushing back in full detail. I tried to shake it off, try to act normal. I went to the kitchen, made tea, and pretended like my hands weren't shaking as I used the kettle. But even while I sipped the hot drink, my eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. I half expected the doorknob to turn again, even in broad daylight. My uncle came into the kitchen a few minutes later. He looked tired, more tired than usual. His hair was messy, and his eyes had that dull, sleepless look. But when he saw me sitting there with my tea, he tried to smile. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile back. He poured himself a cup of tea, and for a moment we sat in silence. I wanted to tell him everything, about the open lock, the moving shadows, the whisper. But I didn't know where to start. And part of me was afraid he would dismiss it, or worse, confirm it. "How'd you sleep?" he asked casually. I swallowed. My voice came out thin. "Not great." He nodded slowly, staring into his cup like he already knew the reason. "Old houses can be noisy," he said. The way he said it didn't comfort me. It felt like he was choosing his words carefully, too carefully. I hesitated, then forced myself to ask, "Uncle, what's in the basement?" His hand tightened around the cup, just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for me to see. He kept his eyes down as he spoke. "Just storage," he said. "Nothing important." It was the same answer he always gave. The answer that never felt true. I waited, hoping he would say more. But he didn't. He sipped his tea, avoiding my eyes, pretending everything was normal. The silence between us stretched thin. I could feel the weight of something unsaid pressing into the room. Finally, he cleared his throat and stood up. "I have errands to run today. If you need anything, call me." His voice trembled slightly on the last part before he walked toward the front door. As he left, he paused at the hallway. His eyes flicked toward the basement door barely for a second, but enough that I caught it. There was something like fear in his expression, something old and familiar. Then he turned and left the house without another word. The moment the door shut behind him, the house felt too quiet. I set my cup down and walked toward the hallway again, even though my legs felt heavy. The basement door looked normal, just a simple wooden door with peeling paint. But now, after everything that happened, I couldn't look at it the same way. I needed answers. I needed to know why my uncle avoided it, why it opened on its own, why something inside whispered my name. But opening the door in broad daylight felt just as terrifying as last night. Still, I couldn't leave it alone. I stepped closer, listening. The house was still. No movement. No whispers. Nothing unusual except the quiet ticking of the wall clock in the living room. Then something caught my eye. A faint mark on the wooden floor, right in front of the basement door. Thin, almost invisible unless you were looking closely. A long, narrow line, as if something had been dragged across the floor from under the door. My chest tightened. I crouched down slowly, touching the mark with my fingertips. It felt smooth, almost freshly made. The doorknob twitched, and I froze. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just a small, sharp movement that sent a cold shock up my spine. I waited, barely breathing, expecting it to turn again. But it didn't. It stayed still, as if whatever touched it had vanished or simply changed its mind. I stepped back until my shoulders touched the wall. My eyes stayed locked on the door, waiting for even the smallest sign. But the hallway stayed quiet. The house stayed still. And for a moment, I wondered if the movement I saw was just my mind playing tricks on me after a restless night. But the mark on the floor, that was real. I forced myself to pull away from the hallway, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the basement knew I was there, knew I was watching. Every time I turned away, I felt like eyes were following me from behind the door. Even when I walked toward the kitchen, the sensation wouldn't leave. I tried distracting myself by making breakfast, but the sound of the frying pan felt too loud in the otherwise silent house. I kept glancing toward the hallway, expecting to see the door swing open again. Each time I turned my head quickly, I felt foolish, but I couldn't stop. After a few minutes, I heard a noise, not from the hallway, but from the living room. A soft thump, like someone setting something down. I stiffened, holding my breath. The sound came again, a little louder this time. I turned off the stove, the silence suddenly too sharp, and stepped carefully toward the living room. The curtains swayed slightly, even though the windows were closed. A soft breeze brushed past me, but I couldn't feel where it came from. I checked the windows, the vents, even the ceiling fan. Everything was still. There was nothing there. But the strange thing was, the air in the room felt a little heavier, like someone had just walked through it and left the space unsettled. I walked slowly around the room, checking behind the furniture, even though I knew nothing would be hiding there. I tried to convince myself that houses make weird noises all the time, especially old ones. Maybe the sound came from the roof or the old pipes. Maybe the curtain moved because of the temperature. But none of those reasons calmed the unease twisting in my stomach. I left the living room and went back to the hallway. The basement door remained still, the padlock reflecting a faint shimmer from the window near the staircase. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Almost staged. I suddenly felt the need to get out of the house. Fresh air. Sunlight. Anything would be better than staying alone with a door that moved on its own. Outside, the day was warm and bright. Birds were chirping. Kids down the street were playing. Normal sounds, normal life. But even while walking, I couldn't shake the tension sitting tight in my chest. On the sidewalk, I pulled out my phone and called my uncle. He didn't answer. I tried again. No answer. I figured he might be in a shop or somewhere where he couldn't hear his phone. Still, something about the silence made me feel uneasy. I kept walking until I reached a small park a few blocks away. Families sat on benches, an elderly man fed pigeons, and a couple jogged past me. The world didn't look like it had anything wrong in it, but all I could think about was that whisper from the basement. I sat under a tree, trying to put my thoughts in order. There were too many questions and not a single answer. Why was the basement door locked in the first place? Why did it open after decades? Why did something inside know my name? While sitting there, my mind drifted to when I was younger, visiting this same house during holidays. I remembered playing hide and seek with my cousins. I remembered running through that same hallway, laughing, thinking nothing of it. But even then, none of us ever went near the basement door. It was always locked, always quiet, except once. I remembered hearing a noise when I was about 12. A dull knock. I thought it was one of my cousins trying to scare me, so I approached the door and put my ear to it. I didn't hear anything else after that, but when I stepped back, my uncle appeared from nowhere. His face was pale. He told me to stay away from the door, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. I didn't understand why he reacted like that, but the memory sat heavy in my mind now. Thinking about it made me feel like the basement wasn't just storage. It never was. Eventually, I got up and walked home. The entire walk back, my heart thudded with each step, as if the house itself was pulling me towards something I wasn't ready for. When I reached the front door, I hesitated before opening it. The warm sunlight behind me felt safe. The dim hallway inside felt like another world. I stepped in slowly. The house was quieter than when I left it, the kind of quiet that felt intentional. I walked to the hallway again. The basement door looked exactly the same, but something new caught my eye, something I didn't notice earlier. Right at the bottom edge of the door, a small sliver of darkness peeked out. Like the door wasn't fully flush with the frame anymore. It wasn't open enough to see anything, just enough to see that it wasn't tightly shut. I swallowed hard and leaned closer, stopping a foot away. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Hello. Silence. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, like someone was listening. A chill ran down my back, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake off the cold creeping into my bones. I turned away, deciding, not wisely, to ignore it for now. I told myself I'd wait for my uncle to come home. He had to know something, and I needed answers. But the day stretched on, and he didn't return. Hours passed, and the sun slipped lower in the sky. The house grew darker. The shadows lengthened across the floor, reaching toward the hallway, toward the basement door. By evening, I started pacing between the kitchen and the living room. Every so often, I'd look down the hallway just to make sure the door hadn't opened on its own again. Around 7 p.m., my uncle finally called back. Hey, he said, his voice faint. Sorry I didn't answer earlier. Everything okay? I hesitated. I think we need to talk about the basement. Silence. A longer silence than last time. His voice finally came back, quieter. I told you it's just storage. No, I said softly, my throat tightening. It's not. Something's going on. The door it opened last night. On its own. Another silence. This one stretched even longer. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. Listen to me carefully, he said. Don't go near that door. No matter what you hear, don't open it. My chest tightened. Why? What's in there? But instead of answering, he only repeated, just don't go near it, before hanging up. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my skin tingling. My uncle knew something. Something he'd avoided telling me for years. And now, as the house grew darker and that sliver shadow beneath the basement door seemed to spread just a little wider, I understood something else too. Whatever was behind that door wasn't waiting for him. It was waiting for me. And the night wasn't over yet. When the call ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had experienced since arriving at the house. My uncle's voice, the fear inside it, that shook me more than the basement door ever could. He wasn't confused. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't brushing it off anymore. He was scared, terrified even. And that fear wasn't aimed at the house in general. It was aimed directly at the basement. And now, I knew for sure that whatever was waiting behind that door wasn't some harmless thing. It wasn't a trick of light or an imagination issue. It wasn't the house settling, and it wasn't old pipes making noises. Something was there. The house felt colder the moment I set my phone down. The last bit of daylight faded through the windows, turning the walls into dull shapes. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening carefully. The ticking clock sounded louder than usual, echoing through the quiet like it was counting down to something. I tried turning on the TV just to feel less alone, but even sound from the screen felt swallowed by the strange atmosphere inside the house, like the walls absorbed every noise. After a few minutes, I turned it off again. It didn't help. My eyes drifted once more toward the hallway. The sliver under the basement door was bigger. It wasn't supposed to be bigger. I took a step closer, then another, my heart thudding harder with each step. I stopped when I reached the start of the hallway. Something inside me warned not to go nearer, but I couldn't look away. The door wasn't fully open, not like before, but it wasn't firmly closed either. The gap looked like someone had pushed it from the inside, just slightly, just enough to let air escape. Or to watch. A faint draft drifted into the hallway, colder than the rest of the house. The kind of cold that didn't feel like temperature. It felt like a presence. I waited, straining my ears. Quiet breathing. Not mine. Slow, steady, almost calm, coming from the other side of the door. My chest tightened. My hands went cold. I took a shaky step back, trying not to make a sound. That steady breathing continued, soft but unmistakable, echoing faintly from the crack. I whispered, "Who's there?" And the breathing stopped instantly. The sudden silence was worse. Much worse. It felt like whatever was behind the door heard me clearly, and was now listening even closer. I backed away until I reached the living room again, grabbing the edge of the couch for support. The cold draft faded, but the feeling of being watched didn't. It clung to me like a shadow. Minutes passed. Maybe 10, maybe 15. Time felt strange, stretched thin. I kept pacing around the living room, my mind racing with every possibility. I checked the front door twice just to make sure it was unlocked, that I could run out if I needed to. But something inside me whispered that the danger wasn't outside. It was right here, one door away. I looked at the clock. 7:47 p.m. It was getting late. My uncle still wasn't home. The street outside gradually quieted as families settled into their houses. By 8:15, the neighborhood was almost silent except for the occasional car passing by. Inside the house, though, the silence felt alive. Around 8:30, I heard something again. A faint tap. One single tap from the basement door. Then another. Slow. Rhythmic. Like someone knocking not to be let out, but to let me know they were there. I moved to the hallway again, this time with slower steps. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. The tapping continued, steady, patient. Not frantic, not forceful, almost polite. Tap. Pause. Tap. The closer I got, the colder the air became, as if the temperature dropped with each step. I stopped just far enough that I couldn't touch the door unless I reached out. "Stop," I whispered, even though I didn't know if I meant it as a command or a plea. The tapping stopped immediately. A wave of relief and dread hit me at the same time. Whatever was behind that door wasn't blindly hitting it. It was responding. It understood me. And it was waiting. My breath shook. I tried to convince myself to walk away again, to go back to the living room, to call my uncle over and over until he answered. But my eyes stayed locked on the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the padlock rattled. Just once. Metal against metal, sharp and sudden. I jumped back, the sound slicing through the silence like a knife. My heart hammered, so hard it hurt. The lock didn't fall off. It didn't open. It just shook, as if something tugged it from the inside. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Uncle, please come home." But he wasn't here, and the house didn't care. The rattling stopped, but I didn't feel any safer. I moved backward until I reached the living room doorway again. I stood there with my hand against the frame, trying to steady myself. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. The third flicker was longer, holding darkness for almost 2 full seconds before snapping back on. In those 2 seconds, I felt something shift in the air. A pressure that settled onto my shoulders. A presence that moved carefully, almost curiously, inside the hallway. I took several deep breaths, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every passing minute. It didn't matter where I looked, in the kitchen, the living room, even out the window. It was like the house itself was holding its breath. The night crept in fully, and by 9 p.m., the last bit of daylight was gone. Shadows stretched through the rooms, clinging to the corners. Every sound, from the settling floorboards to the distant hum of a car engine, felt amplified. I tried turning on more lights, but the bulbs flickered each time, like they were fighting against something unseen. The electricity wasn't the problem. The problem felt deeper, like something in the house didn't want the lights to stay on too long. By 9:23 p.m., the basement door made another sound. A slow, dragging scrape, like something was brushing against the inside of the door. I froze mid-step. The scrape continued for several seconds, then stopped. Then another scrape sounded, this time lower, closer to the floor. The hair on my arms stood straight up. I felt sick, like my body recognized something before my mind could process it. Then, suddenly I heard it. A whisper. Soft, fragile, but clear. "Are you there?" My heart nearly stopped. The whisper wasn't angry or threatening. It sounded familiar, like a voice I should recognize but couldn't place. My throat tightened. I couldn't answer. I wouldn't answer. The house went still again. My phone buzzed suddenly, making me jump. I grabbed it instantly, hoping it was my uncle. But it wasn't him. It was a text from an unknown number. "Don't open it." That's all it said. Just 2 words. My stomach twisted. The timing was too perfect, too specific. I tried calling the number, but it didn't ring. It just said disconnected. I stared at the basement door again, the dark gap beneath it, the slight tilt of the lock, the faint cold seeping through. Something was happening in this house. Something that had been waiting for years. And now, as the lights flickered again and the breathing returned, slow, steady, whisper soft, I realized one thing for certain. The basement wasn't trying to keep something in. It was trying to let something out. And it wasn't going to wait much longer. The silence in that hallway didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt active, like it was listening to every breath Mason took as he stood frozen near the doorway of the storage room. The faint vibration he felt earlier wasn't a trick of his nerves. Now it pulsed again, slow at first, then quicker, like the rhythm of something waking up. He took 1 step back, lifting the flashlight higher, trying to see if the thin line of darkness under the door had changed somehow. It hadn't. But something else had. A shape moved behind the frosted window of the upstairs hall. Not a full silhouette, more like a blur, a smear of motion, as if someone passed by too fast, but their presence left a delay behind. Mason's heart squeezed, and he held his breath, waiting to hear footsteps. None came. The house stayed still, like a held breath. The only sound was the soft buzz of the flashlight in his shaky hands. He didn't call out for his sister this time. Something told him not to. Something deep, instinctive. The same feeling that stops you from putting your hand in dark water. He stepped quietly, trying not to disturb the old floorboards as he moved toward the stairs. Halfway there, he noticed something strange. His phone, which had been completely dead earlier, was glowing faintly inside his pocket. He pulled it out carefully. The screen wasn't on, but the camera light indicator was flashing. Very dim, almost unnoticeable. His phone was recording something. Recording on its own. He didn't remember opening the camera. He didn't remember touching the screen. When he tapped it, the phone vibrated once, then stopped flashing. The screen turned on completely, only for a second. Long enough for him to see a single picture saved in the gallery. A picture he definitely didn't take. It was the door. The same locked door. The same blurry frame. But the timestamp was wrong. It wasn't from tonight. It was from August 14th, the exact date the door had opened on its own years ago. He felt his stomach drop, like he was falling even though he was standing still. The memory hit him again, being a kid, watching the door slowly push inward while the whole house went dead quiet, as if waiting. No wind, no footsteps, no explanation. And someone else had been standing behind him back then. He had felt the presence, the weight of it, but he was too scared to turn around. He had always convinced himself it was his imagination. But now his phone had a picture of that moment. A moment he never recorded. A picture that shouldn't exist. His breath came faster, and for a second, he thought of waking his sister and leaving the house entirely. But another thought twisted inside him. Something he didn't want to admit. He needed answers. Whatever was happening wasn't random. Someone or something wanted him to see this. Wanted him to remember August 14th. Wanted him to come back. He moved up the stairs more carefully than before. The air on the second floor felt heavier, warmer, like a room where too many people had been breathing. The hallway lights flickered once, dimmed, then steadied. He walked toward the blur he had seen earlier. Flashlight pointed straight ahead. The floor creaked behind him. He spun instantly, beams slicing through the dark, but nothing was there. Only that heavy silence again, pushing against his ears. He swallowed hard and turned back toward the end of the hall. The small attic door was slightly open. It had been shut for years. They never used the attic because it smelled like old insulation and dust. Now it hung open, just enough to show a sliver of darkness. He approached slowly, each step feeling like it took too long. When he reached the door, he raised the flashlight and nudged it open farther with the back of his hand. The light hit the cluttered space inside. Old boxes, blankets, wooden crates, and far in the back, a single picture frame leaning against the wall. He climbed inside, careful not to disturb anything. The floor shifted under him, but the attic stayed silent. He crouched and lifted the frame gently. It was dusty, but the glass wasn't cracked. He wiped it with his sleeve and froze when he saw the photo inside. It was his family. Him, his sister, and his parents. But the background wasn't familiar. It wasn't their living room or backyard. It was the hallway downstairs. The exact angle he had been standing earlier tonight when the door started vibrating. But there was someone else behind them. A figure standing in the doorway. Too tall. Shoulders slightly hunched. Face hidden in shadow. Not detailed enough to identify, but clear enough to know it didn't belong in the picture. And the date in the corner? August 14th. Again, his hand shook so hard the frame nearly slipped. He set it down slowly, breathing unsteady, heart thundering. He didn't understand how this photograph could exist. His family never stood for this picture. They never posed in that hallway. And the figure behind them, he had never seen it before. Or maybe he had, and he just didn't remember. A faint creak echoed behind him. This time, he didn't turn. Something told him not to look back yet. Instead, he listened carefully, trying to understand the direction of the noise. Another creak followed, closer, as if someone stepped onto the attic ladder. He heard a slow inhale, not his own, from just outside the attic door. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, the screen lit fully. A notification popped up, but he couldn't reach for it. He didn't dare to move yet. The buzzing stopped, and the screen went black again. For a second, the attic went completely still, like even the air was waiting. Then a faint sound drifted up the ladder. A whisper. Not loud, not clear, but definitely someone's voice. And definitely calling his name. He felt the cold rush up his spine, the kind that makes every muscle tighten. He waited, breath held, heart pounding painfully. Another whisper came, closer this time. Not threatening, not angry, just calling. Familiar somehow, yet impossible to place. He finally turned around, but slowly, ready for anything, flashlight pointed downward. No one was there, only the attic ladder, open, leading down into the dark hallway. But something had climbed up partway. The dust on the ladder rungs was disturbed. Recent footprints. Too fresh to ignore. Too clear to pretend they weren't real. Mason's legs trembled as he backed away from the opening. He didn't know whether to leave the attic or stay inside it. Whether going down would be safer or more dangerous. His throat felt tight, and he swallowed hard, trying to calm his breathing. The whisper came again. Closer. This time, right below him. And then, before he could even react, the attic lights flickered once, twice. And the ladder shifted, as if someone unseen was now climbing up. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the picture frame, staring in terror at the dark opening. Because whatever was coming wasn't stopping, and it definitely wasn't human. The wood creaked again, closer, and Mason realized he wasn't alone up here. Mason pressed himself back against the attic wall, his breath tight and uneven as the ladder groaned under the weight of something rising toward him. The flashlight flickered in his hand, its beam shaking across boxes and old crates. He tried to steady it, but fear made everything feel heavier, slower, as if the attic air thickened with every creak from the dark opening. Then the ladder stopped moving. Silence pooled in the attic again, too deep, too complete. Mason waited, his pulse loud in his ears. For a moment, he wondered if whatever was climbing had left or slipped back down into the hallway. But something in the stillness told him it hadn't. It was waiting, watching, listening to him breathe. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and forced himself to step forward. One slow step, then another. He leaned over, just enough to angle the light down the ladder. Nothing, only the empty hallway, the shadows long and stretched, reaching toward the attic like fingers. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and stepped back. And the attic door slammed shut. Hard. The impact shook the dusty beams above him, and he dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the wooden floor, spinning until its beam pointed directly at something across the attic. Not the ladder. The far corner. The place he hadn't checked. A tall figure stood there. Not moving. Not breathing. Not fully lit. Just the outline of something too still to be human, with shoulders sloped and head slightly lowered, like it had been waiting for him to look. Mason froze. His throat locked. His instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to run. The attic was too small, too closed, and the only exit was behind the figure blocking the corner. He crouched slowly, reaching for the flashlight without looking away. His fingers brushed it. He grabbed it and lifted it toward the shadow. "Who are you?" he whispered, barely choking out the words. The figure stepped forward, not with a heavy stomp, not with the uneven shuffle of something dangerous, but with a slow, familiar pace. The way someone approaches you when they don't want to scare you. As it moved closer, the features softened into clarity. The shadow wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't anything from the stories he made up to explain the locked door mystery. It was his father, older, pale, tired, wearing the same sweater from the photo in the attic frame. Mason's breath caught. His father had vanished years ago without a trace, no goodbye, no explanation, just disappeared on August 14th. Everyone assumed he left, walked out, changed his life. But Mason always felt something was wrong. "Dad," Mason whispered. His father raised a hand slowly, as if to calm him. His face was gentle but strained, like holding onto too many years of silence. "Mason," he said softly, voice trembling. "You came back." The attic seemed to shrink around them. Mason didn't know whether to run to him or step back. His father looked real, solid, alive. Not a ghost. Not an illusion. But something in his eyes was different, shadowed with something he didn't understand. "Where were you?" Mason asked, voice cracking. His father glanced at the attic door and then the hallway below, as if afraid something might hear. "I tried to protect you. Both of you. From the door." Mason felt cold rush up his spine again. What's behind it? What happened? His father stepped closer, and the attic lights flickered weakly, almost in response. "That door was never supposed to open. Not for us. Not for anyone. It's old. Older than this house. Older than the ground under it. It doesn't lead to a room. It leads to a place that takes things. People. Moments. Time." Mason shook his head. "But how did you?" "I didn't mean to go in," his father whispered. "It pulled me. And it wouldn't let me out, not until tonight." Mason felt his chest tighten. Tonight. The same date. August 14th. "But if you're here now," Mason said slowly, "then it's over? It let you go?" Why? His father looked at him with a pain Mason had never seen before, deep, heavy, and scared. It didn't let me go, he said quietly. It traded me. Mason's stomach dropped. Traded for what? His father's eyes glistened with fear. For you. Before Mason could even process the words, the attic shook with a low rumble. The same pulse he felt under the locked door. The wood under his feet vibrated. The ladder rattled. The light bulb above them flickered violently. No, his father whispered, stepping between Mason and the attic door. I won't let it. What's happening? Mason cried, backing up as the rumbling grew louder. The photo he found earlier slid across the floor and stopped at Mason's feet. The image had changed. The tall figure in the background was now clearer. It wasn't his father. It was Mason, standing in the doorway, watching himself. His hands shook violently as he picked the photo up. The date had changed too. August 14th. Tonight. His father grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look into his eyes. It marked you the day you saw that door open as a child. It's been waiting for this night. It wants you to take my place. No, I'm not going in there, Mason said, panic rising in his throat. You don't have to, his father said. But you have to choose right now. The attic door cracked open on its own. Slowly. Like before. The hallway below was pitch black, but the darkness wasn't empty. It moved, like fog twisting, creeping up the ladder with each breath Mason took. Run, his father said. I'll hold it as long as I can. No. Mason grabbed his father's wrist. Come with me. I can't, he whispered. If I leave, it will follow you. The darkness climbed faster, reaching the top step. Mason, his father said, voice firm but breaking. Go. Mason hesitated. Just 1 second. That was all the darkness needed. A cold rush swept through the attic, hitting them like a wave. The air spun, walls trembled. The attic lights exploded with a sharp pop. Mason felt something grip his arm. Not physical, not a hand, but a pull, like gravity dragging him toward the open door. His father pushed him hard, sending him stumbling backward toward the far end of the attic. The darkness lunged. There was a blinding flash, a shattering sound, and then silence. When Mason opened his eyes, the attic was still. The door was shut. The ladder was still. His flashlight lay next to him, dim but working. His father was gone, completely. Mason crawled to the attic door, yanked it open, and looked down the hallway. The locked door downstairs was wide open, and the vibrations were gone. Everything was calm, too calm. He backed away slowly, heart aching and confused, and as he turned to leave the attic, he noticed the picture frame lying on the floor again. He picked it up. This time, the photo inside showed only him, alone, standing in the attic. Date, August 14th. But the timestamp wasn't from tonight. It was from tomorrow. Mason stared at the picture frame for a long moment, unable to move or breathe. The date printed at the bottom, August 15th, felt impossible. It wasn't tomorrow yet. It wasn't even close. But the image inside the frame showed him exactly as he was now, in the same clothes, standing in the same attic, only with a slightly different expression on his face. He looked tired in the picture, worn out, almost like someone who knew something he couldn't forget. The present Mason swallowed hard and slowly lowered the frame, feeling a strange sense of weight settle over him. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't even shock. It was acceptance, the kind that comes when you realize certain questions won't ever have perfect answers. He walked down the ladder carefully, making sure it didn't creak too loudly. When he reached the hallway, he paused at the top of the stairs. The house felt different, lighter, somehow, like a pressure that had been sitting inside the walls had finally released. The air felt normal again, not heavy, not tense, just quiet, the kind of quiet a home should have at night. For a few seconds, Mason listened carefully. No whispers, no vibration under the floor, no shadow where it didn't belong. Even the locked door on the lower floor, now standing wide open, felt strangely harmless. He didn't want to go near it, not now, maybe not ever. But he didn't feel that pull anymore. The cold presence that always lingered there was gone. He walked down the stairs slowly, his hand trailing the banister. When he reached the bottom, he stood across from the open doorway, staring into the room beyond. It wasn't dark anymore. It wasn't glowing or shaking. It was just a simple old room, empty, dusty, silent, as if whatever had once been connected to it had finally let go. Mason didn't step inside. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached for the doorknob. For the first time, it didn't resist him. He gently pushed the door shut. It clicked softly, like any normal door would. No tension, no vibration, no warning, just quiet. He exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath for too long. His sister appeared at the end of the hallway, rubbing her eyes and squinting at him. She looked half asleep, confused, and unaware of what had just happened. "Why are the lights on?" she mumbled. "Are you okay?" Mason forced a small smile, not wanting to worry her. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just couldn't sleep." "You look like you saw something," she said, frowning. He hesitated. For a moment, he imagined telling her everything. The door, the attic, the shadow, their father, the photo that predicted tomorrow. But when he looked at her tired face, he knew she didn't need that. Not now. Maybe not ever. "Just a weird dream," he said softly. "Go back to bed." She nodded slowly, too tired to question it. As she walked back to her room, Mason felt a tiny surge of relief. Whatever happened tonight, it was his burden now, not hers. Not anymore. He walked into the living room and sat on the old couch, running his hands through his hair. His chest ached, not from fear this time, but from something heavier, grief mixed with gratitude. He had seen his father again. Not in the way he ever expected, but enough to understand the truth. His father hadn't left them. He hadn't abandoned his family or walked away. He had been taken or traded himself to protect them from the thing behind the locked door. And in the end, he had protected Mason again, even after all those years. Mason closed his eyes and let the quiet of the room settle around him. Eventually, he stood up and walked to the front porch. The night air was cool, fresh, almost comforting. Crickets hummed softly in the yard. The world outside looked normal. Nothing strange. Nothing supernatural. Just a small town wrapped in darkness and calm. He stepped outside for a moment, taking a deep breath. The weight on his chest eased. He could still feel a bit of cold lingering in his arm where the darkness pulled at him. But it wasn't growing. It wasn't spreading. It was fading, like a bruise after a long storm. He leaned against the porch railing, letting the quiet night settle over him. For the first time, the date August 14th didn't make him feel sick or scared. It made him feel connected, like he finally understood why the memories felt unfinished all these years. Inside the house, his phone buzzed once. Mason walked back in and picked it up. There were no new notifications, no unusual pictures, no strange recordings. Just one photo remained, the one from the future. He looked at it again, studying his expression. He didn't look scared in it. He didn't look confused. He looked thoughtful, almost calm, like someone who had come to terms with what he'd seen. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or why the photo existed. But he didn't feel danger in it. He didn't feel that cold fear that had filled him earlier. Maybe the photo wasn't a warning. Maybe it was a reminder. A reminder that the story wasn't just about a locked door or a strange shadow. It was about choices, sacrifice, family, and the strange ways life tries to tell us things we're not ready to hear. He tapped the edge of the frame lightly and then set it aside on the coffee table. Mason walked toward his room, stopping only once to glance down the hallway. The closed door looked ordinary again. Just a door. Nothing more. Then he turned off the lights and headed to bed, finally feeling the exhaustion that had been building for hours. As he lay under the blanket, he closed his eyes and listened to the quiet of the house. No whispers. No movements. Just the soft rhythm of nighttime settling around him. He felt safe, not because the danger was gone forever, but because he finally understood it. Tomorrow would come, and whatever the picture meant, he would face it with clearer eyes. Mason drifted into sleep slowly, the memory of his father's voice still warm in his mind. Not haunting, not frightening, just present. A reminder of love hidden behind mystery, and sacrifice disguised as disappearance. And as the first hint of dawn crept toward the horizon, one last thought settled in Mason's chest, gentle and steady. Some doors stay locked for a reason. And sometimes, when they open, they don't take something away. Sometimes they give something back, even if only for a moment. The house stayed peaceful, the night calm, and the story of August 14th finally found its ending. Not perfect, not simple, but human. And Mason slept without fear for the first time in years, knowing the door would never open for him again.